The winter garden is an acquired taste. I used to just really resent winter because, you don't have flowers as much and it's kind of long and in our climate. And but over time you'll realize that those of us who have a truly four-season garden, you get a break. So this is the one time a year I have 2 or 3 months where I don't feel like I have to do much. So I can actually read books and do other things in life and just relax. And the garden, you don't have to water it, you don't have to much. Occasionally, if it's really dry for a long time, you'll water some trees, but I haven't done that much. And then eventually, just when you feel like it, you come up and do some cleanup so that the bulbs, when they come up, look nice and fresh. But I've left some things up now to look at. I've already cut back in the fall quite a bit, but it's like a quiet little drum roll. Just now you have a couple little taps, but then it builds up and builds up. And then, of course, by the end of February and March, things are going crazy. And then there's literally hundreds of things come out in a matter of a few weeks. And then, of course, you're back into full crazy garden mode. So you learn that winter. And then you develop, in Colorado, you have to have a taste for neutral colors, If you were living in a maritime climate, it's still green most of the time. There's a lot of green. Here we have greens, but they're muted greens. They're gray greens. They're sort of yellowish greens. They're not the brilliant Irish greens of summer. And but we have more shades of brown and tan and gold and silver. And, those are colors too. There's, considering there's thousands of plants, the fact that there's something blooming now, statistically, you'd think there ought to be, and January is definitely our slowest month. But even so, we do get the snowdrop, as you can see there. That's Galanthus elwesii. That's a form called monostictus that comes from Turkey. And it's actually the last flower. It started blooming in November, and it usually starts in the fall. And it had maybe 10 or 15 flowers a few months ago. The last ones are just showing up now. And then next to it, of course, over here is just coming into bloom is the Christmas rose, which can bloom at Christmas time. But in my experience, they generally don't bloom till January, February. February is really when they look the best. So if you were to come back in about a month, these would be standing up with very large white flowers, very showy. These come from the eastern part of the Alps, and they grow into the Balkans, into Slovenia and places like that. So they're from Europe, southern Europe, but they grow at high elevations, right at tree line and in the woods there. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, of course, one of the reasons why we like rock gardens so much is that they're not dormant. I mean, everything you see here is half the plants at least are evergreen. They don't look that different than they do in the summertime. And especially, you can see this been freezing. This morning was down in the 20s. By the middle of the day when it warms up, you can see them kind of perk up and at any rate. And then these will definitely rush into bloom as soon as the weather warms up in March. The Daphnes will set bud and they'll be in bloom. In fact, I have a Daphne that often blooms in February, the February Daphne. And so their buds are set, they're ready to move. They're just waiting for predictably warm weather for a while. And then my specialty, of course, one of the plants I'm probably most famous for are the ice plants, because I was the first to introduce those to general cultivation, the hardy ones. That's a Delosperma there. The Delospermas, but I have maybe 10 genera of those growing in here. somebody probably would have introduced them to general horticulture, but I did it in a big way in the 80s and 90s. And now there's literally dozens of people who are hybridizing them, and they're sold by every major, wholesale nursery in North America produces them. And I would guess that literally millions are produced a year. So that's one of my claims to fame, is having introduced those hardy ice plants. And so naturally I have dozens of them in my garden here, Well, it was when I started at the Botanic Gardens in 1980. The one I actually first grew, let's see if I still have some here, is, oh yes, yeah, here's, this whole face used to be full of it. Now there's just one little tuft. The plant that you see there that's bright red is Delosperma nubigenum, and that's the first one I got. I got it from a nursery in Seattle area. It was in Kirkland, a place called the Plant Farm. And he gave it to me. He says, try this plant. I think it'll grow for you. And I thought, a plant from South Africa, a succulent, will grow for me? But I planted it at the Botanic Gardens, and the first year it grew, and it looks Irish green all summer. It grew like crazy. And then in the wintertime, it turned red like that. And I thought, boy, that is the most spectacular form of necrosis I've ever seen. It turns this brilliant red in the winter. And then the next spring, it turned green again. And then it just covers with these incredible yellow flowers, because that started me on my quest with African plants. And since then, I brought thousands of plants from Africa to cultivation. That's one, I call it copper spinner, and it's a sibling to fire spinner. Fire spinner is one that I brought back from South Africa in 2008. And it's actually an undescribed species. Fire spinner was distributed by Plant Select, and it's being grown all over the world now. Literally millions have been propagated. But this is its sib, and this one nobody has. But it has a wonderful flower. It's copper, a coppery orange, and then the center is a vivid purple. So it's almost gross. So my last little winter treasure. See all these in a month. Everything will be cut down to the ground, because I have this full of bulbs. Little tiny bulbs will come up, and naturally I don't want to have them under these. But why don't I cut back these lovely bronzy oranges until I have to? So I leave these till later. But this little corner, which I just put in a year ago, is chock-a-block full of little goodies. So it'll have its season from early spring to late fall. So this was actually quite nice. Even late last fall we had lots of little gems in here. The real queen of the winter garden is a plant in the ranunculus family called Adonis. And there's probably 20 or 30 species of Adonis that grow from Japan all the way to Spain. And unfortunately, I only grow 2. I wish I had them all, because I've seen some of them in nature and they're absolutely gorgeous. But the only one you can find in commerce very easily is this Adonis amaranthus. And there you can see there's 3 or 4 little buds just at the ground surface. They don't look very impressive, but wait a couple weeks. Some years, if it gets warm enough in January, they can be quite spectacular even by now. But this year they're just looking pretty puny. But in a few weeks, you can see they're just loaded with buds. Those will mound up, and they have these huge sunny flowers. And in the daytime, they can be very spectacular. This whole area, this woodsy patch in here, is full of them. These are called choyas. The choyas are the sort of the tree, hardy tree cacti. And they do have these decorative fruits. So those won't actually ripen until the summertime, almost a year after they bloom. It's amazing. So they do have a lot of decorative quality. It's frightens some people. If you look out in the garden, this is not a kind of garden you go traipsing through. But I'm very fond of cacti, because the flowers, of course, when they bloom, they're as beautiful as any rose. And when you have a whole hillside covered with cacti, there's 2 or 3 days in the summertime when they're all in bloom, and they're just absolutely breathtaking. And unfortunately, you never know which day. One day you'll have 100 flowers, and then the next day none. But I love the pads, even in the wintertime. The wonderful thing about cacti is that they are so evergreen. When I started my professional career, a very long time ago, There were two amateur gardeners, and three in Colorado who grew agaves. Marion Haycock had one, and there was a couple who lived on Downing Street, and they had one they collected in Arizona. And then my mentor, Paul Maslin, had one in Boulder. So there were three people who had just one species, agave perii. And since that time, we've got almost 20 different agaves in cultivation. I have 15 of them in the garden here. It's a little plants. That red-looking Echinocerius rigidissimus, for example, nobody considers that to be a very hardy plant, and yet it's looking pretty good right now. So I'm excited about this part of my garden because this is my little Mexican corner. It's probably a good solid zone 6, maybe even 6B here. I don't know why it's so much milder, but the snow never lingers. It seems to, and I can grow all these, sort of tender plants here. So I just love this part of my garden. What am I saying? I love all my garden. Yeah. Yeah.